start this as I always start this, which is saying that I have turned on the recording. So this is a public and recorded conversation with the Kubernetes community. Today is April 7th, and we are going through a demo today from Elastickube. Then we are going to go through a short PostMortem process with David Aronchik, whom I haven't seen yet. David, are you on the call yet? I'm going to go with not yet. We shall see him shortly. So David Aronchik is going to lead a modified PostMortem around the 1.2 launch. Think now about the things that went really well and the things that you would like to see go differently, because we will be asking for those. And then the other thing for you to be thinking about during this, because I know you all did your homework after last call, which is to collect good community exemplars for documentation of development processes and community feature processes. And I'm going to do some audio. Oh, maybe Rob got it himself. All right.
I fixed it. Sorry.
Thank you. That's okay. So we will go through the postmortem. We will talk about the community development process, beginnings of the proposal that Joe has brought forward. I haven't seen Joe either. And then we will see if there are any we are looking for SIGs that want to write blog posts for the Kubernetes community blog as well. So, all right, one last announcement and then we'll get this kicked off. The last announcement is we are going to do our first Asia-friendly time zone community meeting, so expect updates to your calendar items. The first Thursday in May, when we would normally have our meeting at 10 a.m., we're going to have it at 5 p.m. So 5 p.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Pacific. We'll make one meeting a month, happy and friendly for the Asia community. So we will try that, see how it goes. And as always, this is a work in progress. So if it doesn't work, we will change it. All right, so let's kick off the Elastickube demo. So Brannon and Alberto, do you want to tell us what you're up to and then share with us what Elastickube looks like?
Sure. I think, Alberto, your microphone might be muted.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. And can you see my screen now too?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for your time. We are very excited to show you what we have done here at Elastickube. My name is Alberto Arias Maestro. I'm founder and CTO of Elastickube. And a few weeks ago, we released a project called Elastickube. And so what is this Elastickube? So far, we haven't found a category for this project, but we call it a Kubernetes management platform. And our goal is to accelerate the adoption of Kubernetes by complex and large organizations. We believe that we have to provide them with some extra capabilities on the platform. And those capabilities we have scoped on the first release of Elastickube as the following: authentication and authorization of cluster resources. So that means anybody in the organization can go and access the cluster and only access the parts of the cluster that they should be touching. Also provide a simplified and deployment and management experience. And for that, we have adopted the format to describe applications that Helm has created and created a self-service experience. We also are very believers of collaboration and DevOps. And we believe that for individuals to be able to participate on the operations, you have to have a system of notifications that let you know what is happening with the resources that you have created and deployed on the Kubernetes cluster. And finally, for the overall organization to open up access to critical resources, you have to have auditing and reporting of the cluster operations. Elastickube is available today. We try to make it as simple as possible to deploy on any Kubernetes cluster. So for that, we have created a bash script that you can easily download and execute. We also have open source Elastickube. We use the Apache 2.0 license, and we're accepting contributions. We're using exactly the same CLA than Kubernetes. So in terms of looking at how to contribute, this will be pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and I'll show you Elastickube. I have deployed a cluster, a Kubernetes cluster in GCE. And to install it, I'm just going to execute the script that I showed you before, called elasticcube.com by bash. In reality, it takes a few minutes to deploy Elasticcube. It runs as a set of containers and pods and replication controllers inside your Kubernetes cluster in similar fashion that the dashboard. I have already installed it, so it took just a few seconds to verify that all the parts of the system of Elasticcube are up and running. Once you have installed Elasticcube, you're presented with the UI that guides you through the creation of the first user that is going to be by default the cluster administrator of Elasticcube. So I'm going to sign up. And after that, what I'm presented is with an admin console. I'm going to switch now to another instance that I have of Elasticcube because I have already pre-configured. In reality, you don't have to do a lot of configuration. Kind of things that you can do is decide who's going to be a cluster administrator, enable single sign-on. So far, we support the Google Auth OpenID. But as soon as Monday, we are going to add the support for SAML. So you will be required to authenticate and authorize cluster resources. We also support using our password and a regular expression, and we integrate with Git to pull application definitions based on the Helm format. By default, we point you to the Helm/charts GitHub repo, but you can actually provide your own repo. And we already have feature requests to add authentication, so you can have a private repo with your charts, and that is also coming very soon. Finally, you can also configure an SMTP server, and this is critical to be able to send invitations to other users of Elasticcube and to be able to get notifications, email notifications of the life cycle of the resources that you have deployed or managing. To invite other users is relatively simple. Just switch to the users menu and you can just send an invitation. And to send an invitation, just type the email of the person you want to invite and select the namespaces that are going to have access to. You can also put a small note. It's a welcome to Elasticcube. He will receive an email right now, and in that email there will be a link. Once he clicks on that link, he will go through a similar experience that we had when we created the first user. But once he logs in, he will only have access to that namespace, and he will not have access to the admin console. He will only have access to the instance charts menu that I'll show you in a few minutes. Finally, other things that you can do is you can create namespaces, and you can invite who belongs to those namespaces. And in the future, we're also going to add the ability to manage quotas, such as you can restrict how many resources those members of those namespaces can actually use from the cluster. You can also see the list of charts that we have synchronized from the Git repo. This is maintained, synced constantly on the background. So that means that if somebody does a commit and adds a new chart, it will appear immediately. And we've been pointed to the latest version of those charts. Finally, you can have access. You can have access to the list of instances of all of the services that are running on the cluster. Here, as you can see, most of the services that are running are the services that are backing up the backend of Elasticcube. All right. So once you have done all this administration, it didn't take that long. You can see all of the charts that the users will be able to see and deploy. And let me move this. As you can see, you can also, here it says default. This is the namespaces that I have. I can easily switch between namespaces. I'm going to stay in the default namespace, and I'm going to also switch to the instances screen. As you can see in the instances screen, you see all of the resources that are currently running on that namespace. I have a couple of services, replication controller, and a pod. If I click on the replication controller, I can see the events of that replication controller, the selector, and the instances, the pod instances that are part of that replication controller. I can see the match of the tags. I can click on that replicate pod and can get more details. I get a quick snapshot of the CPU and memory that is being consumed by the containers of that. I can get the list of events. I can also, of course, the demo. Oh, there it is. I can also see the details of the containers, and I can even see, have a quick look at the output. This is real time, so as the output is being generated, you can see it happening. And this makes it a lot easier for users to deploy a container and understand what is going on. You can also manage the life cycle of those resources. So I can select those resources and delete them. And basically, they will be destroyed. And also, I can launch new instances of new charts. So this is the list of charts. I select, let's say, Redis cluster. I can provide the additional labels and click deploy. And the orchestration is happening. As you can see, the images were already provisioned, so it was really fast to create those instances. You can see the events, everything that happened. I can go to the containers, and I will get the output. Oh, seems that there's not much output on that one. Let me go to the Redis cluster. Well, you get the output if there's any output. What other things can you do with Elastickube? So I wanted to share with you the rest of the roadmap and things that are coming in the next few weeks. We mentioned notifications. This is how the notifications are going to work. You're going to get a little bell in the corner with all the operations that have happened. You can see who in the organization did what to any of the resources. You can opt in to get those notifications via email in a similar fashion that you might get notifications on a repo when you subscribe on GitHub. And you can also explore all of the notifications across all of the workspaces in a historical fashion. We also, that's one of the requests, we are going to launch a kind of a dedicated site to documentation and extra information on how to operate, although we are trying to make the experience of Elastickube as simple as possible, such as anybody that has never used Kubernetes can go into Elastickube, perform a deployment, and even perform complex operations like a rolling update or a canary deployment. We also simplified the ability to diagnose, we create diagnostics and see if anything went wrong. Like, for example, if Hipster is running a conversion that we might not be compatible, being able to show you that information. We also created additional information like dashboards, such as when you jump into an namespace, you get a complete historical information, see what is happening, and being able to drill into the details of the resources that are running on that namespace. We also provide additional capabilities of historical CPU and memory usage, so that means that we are going to aggregate and provide an aggregated view of the information that is already in Hipster. So that's pretty much what we want to share with you guys. If you have any questions, extra information, you can contact me at alberto@elastibox.com. As I mentioned, is open source. You can go to github.com, elastibox, Elastickube, and follow us, to start the projects. Or Sarah has been generous to create a Slack channel in the Kubernetes Slack. It's Elastickube. I'm going to post a link to the deck right after this meeting. And if you have any questions, we'll be there listening to you.
Thank you so much, Alberto. Does anybody have any questions right now while we have them on the spot?
Yeah, one question.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you integrate with the I'll ask it this way, I guess. Kubernetes trunk or Kubernetes releases? Are you doing modifications? Are you layered directly on top? Do you have like a CI flow or something you use to integrate a very rapidly evolving project into what you're doing?
Our goal is to make sure that you can deploy Elastickube in any cluster. So we don't ask you to modify your existing configuration of your cluster. Right now, the authentication and authorization happens on a layer above the cluster that is provided by Elastickube. That being said, our first contribution, we hope is our first contribution to the Kubernetes core project, will be to integrate with the OpenID system and even providing implementation for the SAML authentication, such as the tokens that we generate for the user authentication in Elastickube can also be used from the console with kubectl. So right now it's a layer above, but we are looking at ways of how to take that authentication authorization right into the core and work with you guys to make it a standard.
Very good. So Alberto, I've got one actually on that specific topic on your first contribution. So the folks at CoreOS and Tectonic, they're working on a project called DEX. Mm-hmm. Really, DEX itself is really around those same lines, identity management.
Perfect.
I think they were considering how they could help the community in and around that space as well. And I guess I've got to just ask real quick, are you familiar with that project and/or?
I'm not. I have been talking to the Red Hat guys, and I know they have a different authentication system as well. We've been lurking into the community in the last few weeks, and we are looking forward to build these connections and make sure that we have a concerted effort to standardize the authentication authorization of resources in the cluster. So looking forward to looking into that.
There is also a SIG auth group that is really not very active yet, but we got a report a couple of meetings ago from Eric about it, and this might be a good thing for you all to connect on.
Phenomenal. Looking forward to make it active.
Awesome.
So one last quick question here. So you started your flow by doing the sort of curl to bash thing. Did that actually bring up a Kubernetes cluster, or did it install Elastickube on an existing cluster?
Great question. So actually, to execute that script, we depend on you having kubectl already.
Okay.
So you have.
Okay. So you guys are strictly a management layer on top of a running cluster. You don't try and automate cluster bring up or anything like that.
Yeah, that's correct.
Not a cluster up, which is a separate problem.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Alberto, and Elastickube land. It's always looks fun to see what people are doing in the community.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for your time.
All right. So up next, I did see David Aronchik on digitally here somewhere. So let's go into the Kubernetes launch 1.2 postmortem.
Hi, everyone. How are you? Thank you so much for joining the community meeting, as always. We're going to spend the next, call it 20 minutes or so, doing a postmortem on Kubernetes 1.2 launch and a little bit of the 1.3, but let's really try and stay focused on 1.2. For those of you who have done a postmortem, this will be old hat for you. For those of you who haven't, I like to do them in a fairly agile way, which is we open up the space for everyone. All voices are equal to comment on questions and things that they have that transpired. It is not a place for value judgment or a discussion about the particular thing. I may ask a follow-up question, but by and large, it should just be people saying or typing into chat whatever worked and whatever didn't. And I do want to really stress that it should be positives and negatives. Please say whatever you'd like us to keep doing more of, and please say what you'd like to see happen next time. So we'll spend maybe about 10 minutes doing that, and then perhaps we can look at the list and decide if there's some particular items that we want to dive into a little bit more. So that should take the time. Any questions before we begin? Okay, so this is, like I said, all voices are equal, no value judgments. Feel free to have at it. So what went well and what could have gone better, just start voicing in, typing, whatever you like.
Hey, Bob Wise here. I'll start with just an anecdote from one of I'll say fellow CTOs in Seattle who is running Kubernetes in production, which was release notes for 1.2. This was a real pain point. We ended up having a pretty lengthy discussion about it. They they did an upgrade from 1.1 to 1.2 pretty aggressively, and release notes were apparently not actually available on, or they were hidden behind some. They weren't published publicly, I guess is the quickest way to say it. So I'm not sure that this is like the biggest thing for the release, but since it's one that was very fresh in my mind, having just had a production user complain about it, I thought I would mention it.
No problem. Things of all sizes, truly. You don't get better without hearing everything, so I should stress that. That's totally fine.
We'll also have an update on the release procedure and release notes specifically next week, so that's an agenda item already queued. Positives, negatives? Breakfast with David?
Just sort of tonally speaking, I think that the concept of a post-mortem that only lasts 20 minutes for a release that took a month seems like sort of a short amount of time. And in terms of soliciting feedback from the community, I think maybe like I missed the mailing list post that was like sent out a week prior, but this seems sort of like short notice to get the right parties involved to really discuss the post-mortem effectively. Not saying we shouldn't talk it over. I'm just saying my point of feedback might be that I would love to see this sort of feedback solicited earlier.
No, that makes total sense. The idea was that we were going to have this discussion, follow up with a survey, and then do a more, and then continue the discussion online. But given that we had this community meeting, we wanted to take the time.
I can also do a better job of saying what the upcoming agenda items are, because this has actually been on the agenda doc for 2 weeks. It just hasn't ever been mentioned. So, yep. All right. Others?
One thing Jen and I ran into was a lot of the docs were broken after 1.2. Some of the commands changed, and going through and finding all that was pretty painful.
I sort of think that moment where feature development stopped and we froze the world for a second while we took care of testing stability and sort of had to triage out which was flaky, which was disruptive, which could be run in parallel, probably helped the project quite a bit. It's sort of unclear to me whether folks felt like that was sort of the appropriate way to deal with stability issues going forward, or if there's something we could do to sort of integrate testing best practices a little bit more continuously. And I'll also just, you know, this is sort of what I'm trying to help bring to fruition with SIG testing. But once again, release 1.2 got cut with not that much coverage on alternative cloud providers. I saw a lot of, you know, coverage for every single PR for GCE. But there was a gap of like a week or so where the AWS tests weren't even passing and they weren't even running, and nobody really noticed that. And I'd sort of really like to see alternative cloud providers beyond GCE and GKE be sort of the gate to releases going forward. Sort of on that front, I know there's some folks who are trying to contribute Azure cluster stand-up and testing, and Justin Santa Barbara made a significant impact on the quality of E2E testing and AWS for the 1.2 release. But again, these weren't used to actually gate the release. It's just sort of nice to haves. I'd like to see that taken a little bit further.
Great stuff so far. Anyone else? Thoughts?
Hey, Mike Metrol here. So a quick kind of point is with radical shifts of concepts moving from what was essentially the default of replication controller to now what is it, deployment and replica sets. Those are pretty massive shifts that ultimately, before the 1.2 release got cut, I had to dig to the code and docs and whatnot. But even in the release notes, it's kind of just like a blip on the laundry list of stuff that got changed, which is kind of an understatement because it's such a like radical shift in how you interact and use Kubernetes as of 1.2, with deployments kind of being the standard and replica sets replacing replication controllers for the most part. So I'm not sure what the best method or medium is to make that known, but I don't think a change log necessarily suffices for such a big change.
Yeah, I second that.
I think in general there were some pretty big changes around sort of the model, like, you know, in terms of some of the core concepts. And the questions, things like, you know, ingress, and is it in, as part of core, is it out of core? You know, I don't feel like we got great sort of roll up and summary into these types of meetings along the way. And so at least with the community in general, I don't think there was a lot of great communication of that stuff. And I think some of that translated in terms of the way that we message it. I think that there's a certain amount of like, well, everybody knows this because everybody's been talking about it. And if you're not in the room all the time, it's easy to miss that stuff. And especially for the end customers, again, you know, just reiterating that point, you know, they weren't on the journey with us through 1.2, so they didn't see this stuff gradually. It comes as a big change to them.
Just being on the sort of working on Kubernetes everyday side of things, we spend a lot of time thinking about our commitment to backwards compatibility. So I think maybe this was the wrong perspective, but the perspective someone else had was that you're going to be able to keep using replication controllers as long as you want. And so you can learn about the new things when you're ready. And we're just saying, hey, here's a new thing for you to learn about. You can keep using the whole thing as long as you want. It is going to be the new thing. So, but I mean, I also see your point. I just wanted to share the other perspective there.
Thanks.
And I think it's important to remember that, you know, there's going to be a ton of folks who are, you know, as the project grows, there's going to be a ton of folks who are using Kubernetes for the first time. And when there is this confusion around, okay, what's deployments, what's replication sets, what's replication controllers, how do these relate? You know, the sort of like, you can keep doing what you were doing when everybody, you know, to a statistical, you know, approximation, everybody is new. You know, I think making sure the best practices are clear and that we actually update and communicate those best practices as they evolve and help people sort of transition into it. It's going to be useful for both existing users and new users.
I'm really happy with the changes that happened with the new docs repo that make it much lighter weight process for anyone to contribute docs changes to do just what Joe said. It used to be you had to like get your build going and run a bunch of doc generation stuff, and now you just can edit in GitHub, don't have to have your own Git client, boom. So please check out how easy it is to contribute to docs now.
One note on the backwards compatibility thing. In this particular instance, we kind of broke that because with kube control, the commands you used to run no longer worked. If you do run and then git rc, it broke. So maybe part of the problem was making sure that we didn't break backwards compatibility.
I mean, that's actually a really good point. The kube control is an API. It's a user interface. I mean, people will script against it with bash. And so we should be viewing it as such. And so if we change the behavior of kube control run, that should be, you know, under a flag with deprecation messages and sort of, you know, maybe we don't have to be as hardcore with the API, but I think we want to be very careful about changing behavior there. I know the G-Cloud guys experience that stuff quite a bit.
So Joe, we have a generator flag that will like let you keep the old behavior, but I think we didn't do a good enough job first telling people that if they expected stable output for our commands, that they should have been using the generator flag in their scripts. So maybe that means better documentation on our part to just say that moving forward. But I think we should be able to free to be changing the behavior of kube control run in the future, as long as it's hidden behind a generator flag. We just need to do a better job at educating the community that they should have been using that if they expected stable output.
I think, you know, look at the Git tool set. I mean, they don't change output, right? I mean, it's like they just don't change it, and they add new features in backward compatible ways, and they view that output as part of the API. I don't know. So that's a deeper discussion, but you know, another thing that I wanted to bring up is that. The fact that there was a misalignment from cutting the release and getting it out and getting all the documentation set, I think is a missed opportunity. There's a huge spike of interest in the project when you announce a new version and when new people see it. And when they can't immediately download it, get stuff working, when everything doesn't line up, when they can't read the documentation, then they're just going to say, oh, it's not ready yet. And they're going to write off the whole version. And maybe if we're lucky, they're going to look at 1.3. So I think we have to be very, very careful to make sure that all the ducks are in the row before we announce anything publicly. And just because the binary has been cut doesn't necessarily mean that we're ready for to announce it and make noise.
I just could not agree with that statement anymore, Joe. And I think my opening anecdote is a good example of that. One, I'll say, typical way to try to address this is to think about having something that's more like a formal beta, so that effectively it's released, but potential users have a little bit of warning to be careful, and I think that helps set expectations.
Would you see the community contributing to documentation during this beta period, or like how do you see getting? You first have to have a feature to try it, to document it. Are you seeing slow feature velocity from core committers so they can work more on documentation, or more community?
I would expect.
How does that happen?
A couple of things there. I mean, so as features move into beta, we should expect full documentation going into beta. But there's an assumption that anything in beta is going to be a little bit really rough and ready. So, but the idea is that by the time you actually make a feature GA, it should have been in beta for quite a while, and all that stuff should be smoothed out, and the documentation should be there. So I think, getting more formal about, what we need, when and where and how, I think is going to be critical, and making sure that we view documentation and tooling as a part of actually calling a feature ready for beta, or, being able to slap that type of label on it. And then the other thing, just to reiterate, I think what Bob said is it may be worthwhile just to take a week, once we have the binaries that we think are the final release, and just call it sort of like, it's in pre-release or something like that, and then just like encourage the community to actually sort of look at the experience with fresh eyes, as if everything was public. And and then at some point a week later, we actually make noise, and that's a good chance for everybody to sort of roll up their sleeves and help fix the documentation and make sure that everything looks smooth. And it's just a matter of messaging, right? We just, we can, we all know that, like, at that start of that thing, the binaries that are cut are going to be the ones that we're going to be releasing. But we have to view the project as more than just a set of binaries.
So we did this for many years at Microsoft, and I just want to see if this syncs with what you're thinking. You do the, you do the basically get to final, and you call it, RC, for example, for lack of a better term, right? So release candidate, and then you say, we have an explicit goal as a community that things stay in release candidate for, call it 2 weeks. And during that time, we're going to sort everything out, and we're going to be super responsive to bugs, as we are right now, right? By the way, right? Like right now, we're super responsive. Like that's why we released 1.1.1 and 1.2.2 so quickly, because we, heard things. But instead, it's almost just a different kind of lens on it, and it makes everyone in the community very aware. Hey, this is out there. But then all our things like the 5 days of Kubernetes and other things like that, we time for when it actually goes GA, rather than at RC. Is that roughly what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think that's generally the idea, right?
Okay,
and I think just viewing the whole experience instead of actually just the binaries and the bugs in the bug database.
Yep. Okay, I think that makes terrific sense. Great.
There's a 1.2 point you'd like to make.
So I had at least a couple users hit a case where they had upgraded the API server, inadvertently not upgraded a node, and then they reported issues against X or Y new feature doesn't work, and it's because they were getting scheduled onto a kubelet that didn't support the feature. So Justin Santa Barbara created an issue for this. The number escapes me right now, but I think we should consider adding a condition for a node that lags the version of the API server that it's connected to make it a little bit more obvious when these issues happen, because it definitely confused at least a handful of people that were upgrading.
Please do ping me offline. There's actually been quite a bit of thinking. Sorry, I didn't mean to respond. there's actually been quite a bit of thinking around both version skew as well as potentially helping folks to have better visibility into when there's not only skew, but when there's drift off of like master or last head or something like that. And I'd love to talk to you more about that.
Yeah, sure.
I think a related issue is something that we've pinged a little bit on the SIG scale, and again, I can look up the issue, which is being able to just easily get a dump of the configuration of a cluster, right? And this is different from being able to set it in a centralized place, which is also a useful thing, but I think separable. But having a way such that when somebody has a problem or a bug report, they can easily get like a block of text that they can copy and paste into a gist that lists the versions, the command line flags, all the tunable parameters, the OS, like all the crap that we'd want to collect to try and say, oh, you're hitting the journal D issue with large clusters, or, oh, look, the version skew here, or, you know, you've set this tunable to some wacky value, right? So I think being able to easily capture that is going to be a really valuable debugging tool.
So we have a nice little lull. How about some things that went really well and you would like to see us do better, faster, shinier, cooler collectively as a community?
Okay.
Opening up the daily war, or opening up the 3 times a week war room meetings to the community was a huge step forward. I greatly appreciate that. That was super helpful.
So the fact that you're getting silence here, Sarah, I think, you know, I've never shipped a software product and been happy with it at the time that I shipped it. I think you need a little bit more distance to be able to see the good things. It's just, you're always too in the weeds when you actually have just shipped something.
I think one thing that did go well over the course of the cycle is on some of the scale items, we had identified some technical debt and actually addressed the debt. And it's paying dividends now, right? So CoreOS is being able to integrate SED3 much easier than they would have otherwise. So I think being able to prioritize some things on the radar for future abstractions as tech debt pay down versus weighing features as the highest priority items, I think will pay dividends as well in the future.
Similarly, the extremely strong effort that was briefly made around test flakes paid huge benefits. And I'm seeing more and more flakes, I think, creep into the system, but that was a huge positive to me.
The system as a whole is a whole lot smoother as an end user. It's a little bit more predictable, not as buggy as my 1.1 .x versions were. So overall, it's just a very smoother process.
The install you said?
Not just the install. It's not the install. The usage of it, right? It's just there's more bugs are squashed. It's smoother. It's snappier. It's faster. Right? You can definitely see the performance metrics kind of looming through, and it's just overall an easier and better experience.
I guess I'd also like to say, having been involved in open source projects of one sort or another for a long time, this is the most fun I've had on an open source project in quite some time, and it's really great community. And thanks everybody for making this such a great community to work with. Really, it's been just phenomenally great.
I wholeheartedly second that.
That is incredibly positive, and especially, Bob, given your long history, that's heady words.
What David's not saying here is, you've pushed us really hard, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the 1.2 release specifically, but I just feel like the community as a whole is starting to mature and actually start the community is starting to look towards wider, problems to be solved instead of actually just noodling on the existing system that we have. And, in the past, I've said that, our goal should be Kubernetes boring, right? So that actually it can be stable and people can, predictably use it. And I think we're definitely moving in that direction. I think that's really good.
Terrific. All right. So in the spirit of using a hard stop, I think this was extremely valuable. We will also circulate in the show notes a survey so people can do this offline, ongoing, and I will take the time and summarize. Let's plan on maybe 2 weeks from now. I will have some summary things, and I will also be reaching out to folks either on the call or elsewhere to own improving given summary areas and notify everyone that they will be taking that on. Again, our goal is continuous improvement. It shouldn't just be as the postmortem, but it is a nice opportunity for us to gather and talk about these things. So thank you all for the time.
Thanks. So we have a very short little update on the release 1.2 branch from Robert Bailey, and then we can jump into a little bit more conversation about communities that do this sort of thing well. So, Robert.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I just wanted to let everyone know Brian Grant has passed the torch for the maintenance of the 1.2 branch over to myself and Zach Maryland. So Brian has done a great job to date, coordinating the large cherry picks after we cut the branch to make sure we got a stable release out. Now that the number of cherry picks has diminished and we've gone back to the sort of 1 PR per cherry pick model, we're going to sort of distribute that responsibility out so Brian can keep focusing on the 1.3 work going forward. So if you have a cherry pick, please send it my way or to Zach. Thanks.
Awesome. And I believe that 1.2 cherry picks happened today. Is that right? Or 1.2.2?
Yes. So the 1.2.2 cherry picks have all been merged into the release branch. We're seeing some flakiness in Jenkins right now, but once that settles down, we plan to cut a release hopefully today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Can I make just a quick comment on the cherry pick process? So this wasn't for the 1.2 branch, it was for the 1.1 branch, but I went through sort of a bit of a trail of woe of bots adding and removing a wide variety of labels from cherry pick approved, cherry pick not approved, no LGTM, release notes needed, release notes not needed. It seems like there's that process is still somewhat in flux or maybe not quite as tightly documented as need be. And the point that I'm trying to drive to is, once again, I'm a community member who does not have the ability to add labels to a PR. So it means that I need to be extra noisy to the reviewer assigned to my PR to properly assign these labels, but I don't know where to point them to make sure that they apply the correct set of labels so my stuff gets cherry picked appropriately. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, and I totally agree. Zach and I fought with the labels getting flipped back and forth by the bot for a couple hours yesterday because we were trying to understand what they were doing. And I think next week, Dave McMahon is scheduled to give a presentation about the release process, and he's written up what this is supposed to look like, and the bot is not quite caught up to the expectations yet. So Eric Paris is working hard to catch that up, and it should be a lot smoother going forward.
And I think there's two things here as well. One is we should have a state machine. Like, we should just draw that out, and hopefully that's what David will show. But we should get that in the docs of, like, here's the various things and where you go through. And I think, part of the problem is also the GitHub permissions are not fine-grained enough. And we should potentially consider, I hate to say it, but adding some sort of automation that enables us to allow end users to change certain labels without requiring that we give them full-on permissions on the project.
Yeah, there are ways to do this. If you separate issues out into a separate repo, you could have different permissions on that issues repo as opposed to all the repos that Kubernetes has for the various efforts ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even easier than that. I think we can just create a...
and I understand and appreciate that GitHub's ACL system sucks. I'm just trying to say, as a member of the community, the more you start to create a process that leans on labels, the more friction it creates for me to contribute and not have to go nag somebody who does have right access to shepherd my thing through, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could easily create an App Engine app that had the right permissions on Git that only allowed community members that used GitHub OAuth to get your credentials and only allowed you to manipulate labels on your own PRs and stuff like that, and only certain labels, obviously not like the LGTM label. It's not a hard thing to do. This is definitely one of those like PRs welcome kind of situations where, I mean, we all think we can help, but if there's somebody out there who's looking for a little standalone project that would really be awesome, something like this as an App Engine app would be great.
And a Chrome extension also, as long as we're wishing for ponies.
Wow, you did drink the Kool-Aid when you were here. Okay, so this actually leads very conveniently into the Kubernetes efforts documentation that Joe has been working on, and there have been lots of comments and conversations about in the document, as well as trying to figure out what and how we can unblock a lot of these friction points for users. So, and also just, this has spawned a whole bunch of conversations of the broader, what is the vision for the project and how do we appropriately communicate all of this with people externally, and how do we set expectations when people want to be maintainers or want to have these permissions to add labels or, you know, work their way up the contributor hierarchy, for lack of a better description, and what the expectations are that tie with that. So last week we sent you all home with homework to get communities that do this well, communities that you're familiar with and are happy with, and, you know, would love, even if it's just a piece of the way they do something. And I saw a PHP proposal link in Joe's document, and for something from the PHP community.
No, it was it's the Python.
Oh, Python. I'm
process.
sorry, not PHP. But it's the Python something. It's P something P, right?
PEPs,
Okay.
Python extension process. I think I don't know.
Is it enhancement?
Enhancement. It's enhancement. Yeah.
So we saw the PEPs process in, documented in the, or referenced in this doc. Are there other communities and processes for getting efforts tracked, having people grow through community, grow through and into community leadership positions? Who does this well? Who can we learn from? Because you all did your homework, right? Aaron is looking up and away carefully.
I can cite one that I think is terrible.
Okay, we can do terrible too.
I think the JSR process is terrible.
Okay.
Even before Oracle took it over. Like the Java standard stuff was a clear example, I think, of being really vendor heavy and kind of organized to support certain vendors.
Mm-hmm. Which we want to avoid.
Which we would really like to avoid.
Yeah.
Right. I actually think that the kernel works pretty well. I mean, it's kind of a heavy-duty vetting process because it expects so many qualifications. I mean, it's a tough place to work, but I actually think that
So I think one downside for the kernel is you hear all these horror stories of people doing a ton of work and then having that essentially be rejected at the 11th hour from their point of view. And I think that's very frustrating for the community. And so I think some of the stuff here is to actually like I think, you know, Quentin says, oh, something that happens is that you want to do something that crosses 3 different, you know, components, however we define components. One of those hasn't signed up to actually do it in the release, right? What do you do then, right? It's like, that's a tough problem, but at least if you see that earlier rather than later, you at least, you know, aren't going to be surprised after you've written a ton of code.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I don't see a lot. And actually, I'm not sure that I see this in a lot of places, the sort of like pre-approval, pre-disagree and commit kind of like, yeah.
So
OpenStack has evolved a pretty complex process for that, which works well for a very large community with a lot of vendors that want to play together and need sort of a democratically elected group of humans to keep the vendors from overriding each other or getting too much of an upper hand over each other. I don't know if that...
Would you count it as a positive example?
For what it seeks to achieve, I think it does it very well.
Okay.
It definitely frustrates some developers and companies sometimes when they want to get a feature in. And the process, as it is today, it's evolved over about 6 years to be a lot of early design and discussion. And if you don't, if you're writing some code and you don't go participate with that community in the design process, if you just show up with code, it's typically rejected out of hand. Whether it's good or not, it's because you didn't participate in the design.
Yep. Okay. Can you drop a link into the notes for that specifically?
I can try. There's a, well, for what? For a document of the process and how they want people to participate?
Yes. That would be good.
Okay.
And Eric, you were typing up too?
I was just going to say that I think we have to choose between having a culture that is like, show me the code first, and that comes with the kernel problem that you can get rejected after writing a ton of code, or show me the design first, and that comes with the problem that Joe mentioned, that not everyone maybe wants to write a Google-style design doc, and that can be perceived as heavy. I actually mentioned PEP not as a governance process, but just an example that, like, you can have a successful open source project where people write thoughtful design docs as a prerequisite for coding. And my personal view is I'd like us to be design doc first, but that's got to be something, a cultural choice we make as a community. I think it'll be hard to do sort of both at the same time. That's all.
Mm-hmm. My inclination tends to be toward design, at least minimal design. It doesn't have to be full, fully scoped out, all the whistles and bells, but generalized agreement with an early design doc before we get into coding.
One of the things in OpenStack that, because there are so many sub-projects, each sub-project is its own community. They each have slight variances in how they want that community to work. So there's an overarching technical committee that sets the policies for all of the projects. I can point at that, but then again, each project has, I wouldn't even say nuances, there's significant differences in how much design or the templates they want to use for the design, the kinds of decisions that need to get teased out.
Right.
So Diane, in the chat there, you mentioned, I'm sorry, it scrolled off. You mentioned the Django process. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what you like there?
Well, I'm just going to, aside from code reviews and design reviews, what I like about both the Django and the Python community is their inclusivity and their work towards getting new beginners enrolled in the community. That Linux kernel is what it is. It has its own reputation for lacking of that sometimes. And one of the things that I think I see with Kubernetes is, the more complex it gets, the harder it's going to be to get people onboarded to contribute code from square one. So I like both the Python and the Django models for the inclusivity. But I was just pointing out that benevolent Dictator for life worked really great with Python in the early days, and to some extent still does very nicely, but it also helped guide the community nicely. And it's a hard balance, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear we're not going to have a dictator here. But I don't think it's out of the question to have some sort of set of elders that.
Nonsense, Joe. I just assumed you were the dictator.
I do have a gray beard, so that does help.
Gray coming in here.
I know, right?
Those military hats.
If I had hair, it would be gray.
Okay, so we have just a couple of minutes left because it would be awesome if we didn't all bust out of here right at 11 o'clock on the nose, as we so often do.
Just please, more comments in the doc.
Yes.
So let's keep it coming. Let's keep the discussion going on there. There's been a lot of great stuff so far. Thank you.
And there's a lot of pieces that are evolving as, we should also think about this. Like, how do we onboard new contributors? Like, there should be an actual program to do this. How do we do that? So we're fleshing out lots of little stubs that also go, and there should be a thing here, which is great. Eric wants a benevolent dictator for life. Aaron, though, asked about the submit queue, and this is why I wanted to give us a couple of minutes. The submit queue is currently blocked, and do we have any updates? Do we have anyone on the call that can update the plan, the path, or the pain at the moment? I know there were conversations this morning about the testing and pushing against testing again. I don't know who's on the call.
Yeah, so this is Derek. I was the one who originally asked about this. Like, this is part of the problem I have right now in the project a little bit is you look at the submit queue status page and you get the message that the entire thing's blocked, and I don't know how to help out, I guess. And I can't remember for the 3 things that have red X's right now. I don't remember if all of them must be passing or not either. But yeah, just curious because nothing appears to have merged for a while.
Yeah, just looking at Jenkins, we see correlated failures across many runs starting at about 8 a.m. this morning. So there may be some underlying issues with GCE that need to be debugged. Jeff just noticed that he's build caught for the day, so nobody's been paying close attention this morning, but that will change very shortly.
That is outstanding. That's how we run here at Google.
Transparency.
People find out they're responsible for something 8 hours into their job.
Sorry, apparently the calendar is broken, so the automatic notifications that tell people like, "Hey, this is your job tomorrow," never went out. So
yeah, it sounds like
I just noticed to try and give an update to you guys and looked it up, and so that's.
See, again, hooray for transparency.
And to be clear, the right way to fix this and the right way to make this go forward is go find the tests that are marked flaky in GitHub and fix those issues, right? Like, the fact that the build gets broken is representative of a underlying problems in the code that we should fix, right? And so, I mean, sometimes it's infrastructure, sometimes providers have a bad day, but in which case
I think the point here is there's still sort of 2 tiers of people who have the ability to dive in and fix these things out, and I still have an open question. I'm still kind of confused how we in the community can more effectively help out when some of this stuff is still walled off.
Well, I mean, so if it's more often than not, these are problems in the end-to-end tests flaking out, right? I mean,
so usually I thought
our build infrastructure, then clearly you can't, and that's just because we run our own build infrastructure, and it's too bad.
Yeah, it's one thing, Brendan, if you see like it's not merging because they have a flake, and then you go and tell KSpot to test it again, give your flake, and eventually things pass. But I mean, right now we're at the point where like you just look at a PR and all things pass, and the bot's not doing anything, right? So, I mean...
Well, no, I mean, the merge, the things that it blocks on the merge queue, those are end-to-end test runs too, right? We run continuous end-to-end at head, in addition to the end-to-end that we run on your PR. And so if those tests fail, that's when they go red. And those tests fail either because, we leak resources and we run out of resources, we run out of quota, which is, or because there's an underlying problem in the infrastructure, or because there's a flake in an end-to-end test.
Oops, sorry.
So like those are the causes, and some of those are not fixable by you, right? I mean, if we run out of quota, obviously you guys can go in and find the resource leaks, but you don't have access to the projects that you need in order to delete the things that we're leaking. If our infrastructure is broken, then like we can't. Again, because of the permissions, you can't let people do that. But flaking tests are something that everybody should be owning concretely, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
I understand that it's frustrating. I mean, it's frustrating for us too, right? Like, it's not. I wouldn't overestimate the amount of extra, ability that the end-to-end developers or the developers at Google have into this stuff either. They have to go in and dive in and scrape through the logs and like figure out what the heck's going wrong too, right? Or just hope that it deflakes on the next run, which is how the tragedy of the commons happens.
I'd like to take this opportunity to mention yet again that a distributed test dashboard is a blocker for 1.3 and will be coming order of soon. So just FYI, we have heard this loud and clear, and giving people the ability to have better visibility into tests and running their own tests and submitting those test results is of a key importance that we are working on now.
So, right. David, I would greatly appreciate either you or the person who's shepherding that effort forward to present about that at SIG testing either next week on Tuesday or the following Tuesday beyond that.
Have you met Eric, by the way?
Theta?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I'm trying to sort of close the loop here because you're talking about something that I haven't actually heard about a roadmap or commitments for. And so it's a place where people are interested in testing, specifically federated testing and the display of test results. Seems like the special interest group about testing would be a great place to have an in-depth discussion about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought he had already presented that, but if not, or regardless, maybe he can revisit it and give an update, and we'll encourage him to do so.
Awesome. Well,
Brendan, all I was trying to get in real quick before we jumped off was right now all of the links are broken on the submit queue status page, so I can't see this underlying error.
Yeah, I posted there's a PR open for that. That's a known issue. Maybe if we can get that contrib PR merged in pretty quickly and the submit queue updated, the links won't be broken anymore.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And we are at 11 o'clock. So thank you all. As always, the discussion can continue in Slack or on the mailing lists, and we will see you all next week. Thank you.